"You've always said we were your priority, Mom." That's what he said. Not hello. Not how are you doing. Just that sentence delivered flat and quiet, like a stamp of judgment on everything that came before it. I had just explained, as carefully as I could, that I wasn't able to lend him the money right now. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I didn't have it sitting there in savings. But because I'd scheduled cataract surgery for the following month, and the out-of-pocket cost after insurance was going to run close to $7,000. I'd had the date on the calendar since February. I'd already paid the surgical center's deposit. I told him all of that. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've always said we were your priority, Mom, but I guess when it really matters, we're not." And then he hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed and held the phone in my lap. Outside, a neighbor's sprinklers were making their slow arc across the yard. The afternoon sun was coming through the curtains in long strips, and I remember thinking how ordinary the room looked. How nothing in it reflected what had just happened. I've been a nurse for 38 years. I worked labor and delivery for the first 12, then spent the rest in a cardiac care unit until I retired 4 years ago. 6 months after my husband passed. I have held a stranger's hand at 2 in the morning while machines beeped and families waited in the hall. I have delivered bad news more times than I can count, in a voice that stayed steady while my chest tightened underneath. I know what it means to carry something quietly. I have been doing it my whole life. But that call from my son caught me somewhere soft. His name is Emmett. He's 41, works in commercial insurance, lives about 20 minutes from me with his wife Christine and their daughter Evie, who just turned 6. I love all 3 of them. That's not the complicated part. The complicated part is everything else. About an hour after Emmett hung up, a text came through. Not from him, from Christine. "Given your response, I think it's best if we take some family time without outside pressure. Please give us space." I read it twice. Then I opened the family group chat, the one Emmett had created when Evie was born and named Emmett and Family, and found I couldn't see any messages. Not archived, gone, I'd been removed. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and went to fill the kettle. I didn't cry. I thought I might, standing there with the faucet running, but it didn't come. What came instead was something stranger. A very still, very clear sense of recognition, like I'd known this was coming for a long time and had simply refused to believe it. I drove to their house that evening. I don't know exactly why. Instinct, I suppose, or disbelief, or maybe just the need to see it for myself. The drive was familiar. Past the CVS, left at the light by the elementary school, then 3 blocks down to the tan colonial with the big oak in the front yard that drops leaves we used to rake together. Evie and I, with the plastic rakes I'd bought her for her 4th birthday. The lights were on inside. I could see the blue glow of the television through the front blinds. I rang the bell. Nothing. I rang again. I could hear footsteps, the particular sound of socks on hardwood, and then quiet. Then Evie's voice, small and certain, from somewhere behind the door. "Grammy?" And then Christine's voice, hushed and sharp. "Not now, baby. Come away from the door." I stood on that porch for another minute. I didn't knock again. I didn't call out. I just stood there looking at that door, the one I had helped them paint 2 summers ago, a dusty sage green, because Christine had seen it on a design account she followed, and I understood that it was not going to open. I drove home. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay listening to the house make its sounds, the refrigerator, the pipes, the creak of the floor when the temperature dropped, and I let myself think about things I usually pushed aside. When my husband died, I became the only safety net. I don't say that with bitterness. It was just the truth of it. He had been the one to manage the finances, the home repairs, the taxes. When he was gone, I took all of that over, which was fine. I'd always been capable. But I also stepped into something else without fully realizing it. I became the place Emmett called when something went wrong. The next morning, I got down the notebook. It wasn't a formal ledger. It was a blue nurse's notebook, the kind I'd used for years to track patient notes. When I retired, I'd started using the last half of one to keep track of family expenses. Not for any calculated reason, just because I was the kind of person who recorded things. My mother had kept a household budget in a 3-ring binder. I suppose I got it from her. I sat at the kitchen table and read through it. $8,500 for the shortfall on their down payment 4 years ago. They'd needed 12% down to avoid a penalty on the loan. They'd saved 9. I covered the rest. I remember Emmett's voice on the phone when he asked, "I hate even calling you about this, Mom," but I didn't know who else to ask. $3,200 over 6 months in 2021, when the company he worked for did layoffs and his job was one of them. I'd wired it in installments, 300 or 400 at a time, because it felt less like an emergency that way and more like just getting by. $1,400 to a dentist when their insurance lapsed during the job gap, and Christine cracked a molar. $300 a month, every month, for the past 2 years. Sent by Venmo. It had started as a one-time thing for groceries during a tight stretch. Then the next month, Emmett mentioned they were still recovering and I'd sent it again. Then it stopped being asked for and became expected. $600 for a crib. The safe one, Mom, not the off-brand. 8 months of preschool payments for Evie, $900 a month, while Christine was between jobs and they were figuring out childcare. I hadn't been asked for all of it. I'd volunteered because I couldn't stand the thought of Evie losing her spot in the classroom she loved. I sat with that notebook for a long time. And then I thought, who asks how I'm doing? Not a dramatic thought, just a quiet one. Because the answer was sitting in the room with me, and the answer was nobody. Emmett hadn't asked. Christine hadn't asked. They didn't know what medications I was taking, didn't know my surgery was scheduled, didn't know my right knee had been giving me trouble since the winter. I hadn't told them. I'd learned, over years, that those kinds of conversations made Emmett uncomfortable. He didn't quite know what to do with a mother who needed something. I went to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists the way I used to when I'd worked long shifts and needed to stay sharp. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Her name is Gaines. She had handled my estate documents twice since my husband passed, once to update my will, once to set up a power of attorney for Emmett in case I became incapacitated. At the time, it had felt like the responsible thing to do, like planning ahead, like being a good mother. "I need to revoke the power of attorney I granted to my son," I said when she picked up, "and I'd like to make some significant changes to my will." A brief pause, not surprise, just professionalism. "Of course. Can you come in Thursday morning?" I could. Wednesday, I called the bank. I asked to cancel the recurring Venmo link and the automatic transfer I'd set up to Emmett's joint account. The woman on the phone walked me through it carefully and confirmed each cancellation. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still in the kitchen chair and looked at the window. Done. Thursday morning, I wore my good blouse, not for vanity. I wanted to feel like someone making a real decision, not a reaction. Attorney Gaines's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown that always smelled like old paper and floor polish. She stood when I came in, a small woman in her mid-50s with silver-framed glasses and the particular manner of someone who has heard most things and is not easily rattled. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. I told her. All of it. The call, the text, the removal from the chat, the door that hadn't opened, the notebook. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she uncapped her pen. "The power of attorney revocation is straightforward," she said. "We can draft it today. As for the will, who would you like as primary beneficiary?" "My sister," I said. "Cordelia. She lives in Richmond." I paused. "And I want a separate education trust for my granddaughter. I won't have her penalized for her parents' choices. It should be structured so she can access it at 18 for school or for whatever she needs to start her life. Her parents should have no access to it whatsoever." Attorney Gaines wrote without comment. That was what I appreciated about her. We worked for 2 hours. By the time I left, I had signed 4 documents. My shoulders felt different walking down those stairs. Not lighter, exactly, but more aligned, like something had been straightened that I hadn't noticed was tilted. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Emmett. "Hey, Mom. The Venmo didn't come through this month. Is everything okay with your account?" I read it 3 times. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring, the fastest he'd picked up in weeks. "It's not an account error," I said. Silence. I stopped the transfers. Mom, his voice shifted. Why would you do that right now? We're dealing with a lot. I know you are. This really isn't the time to. Emmett. I kept my voice even. I'd spent 38 years keeping my voice even. You told me I wasn't making your family a priority. Then Christine sent me a text telling me to go away. I'm respecting that, and I'm adjusting my finances accordingly. You're making this into something it's not. I had surgery scheduled. I had already paid the deposit. I explained all of that, and I still received a message telling me to stay away. He exhaled slowly. Christine was upset. She didn't mean it like that. She sent it in writing, during business hours. That's not upset. That's decided. He didn't say anything for a moment. I love you, I told him. That hasn't changed. But I won't keep sending money to a household that's asked me to keep my distance. He didn't respond. Then quietly, without anything more, he ended the call. 2 days after that, an email from Christine arrived. 11 paragraphs, I counted. There was no apology in any of them. What there was. A detailed account of how much financial pressure they were under, how stressful Emmett's workload had become, how unfair my timing was given that Evie was starting kindergarten in the fall, how my decisions were creating ripple effects throughout their household, and how she had always hoped for a more collaborative approach from someone who claims to value family. I closed the laptop without replying. That evening, my sister called from Richmond. Cordelia is 4 years younger than me and has always been the one who says out loud what everyone else is only thinking. She called it a gift. I'd called it occasionally exhausting, but never unappreciated. Emmett called me, she said. I figured he might. He said you were pulling back from the family and making things difficult. Did he? I told him if you were pulling back, someone had probably pushed first. A pause. Do you want me to come up? She came the next afternoon with a pecan pie from a bakery off the highway. She put it on the counter without ceremony and poured coffee before I had a chance to offer. We sat at the kitchen table the way we used to when our mother would send us to do homework together. Both of us with our elbows on the surface, easy and unguarded the way you can only be with someone who knew you before you became whoever you are now. I told her everything. She didn't fill the silences. She just stayed in them. When I finished, she cut 2 slices of pie and pushed one across to me. Norma, she said, you took care of patients for 38 years. You took care of Dad when he was sick. You took care of Emmett and Christine through 2 layoffs and a pregnancy that nearly went sideways and a house they couldn't have bought without your help. You have been standing at the edge of everyone else's cliff with a rope in your hands, and not one person has stopped to wonder if you're tired. I didn't say anything. I looked at the slice of pie. The surgery, she said. Are you going alone? My old colleague Estelle offered to drive me. She said she'd stay. Good, she said it firmly. The way you confirmed something that should have been obvious all along. That's good. She stayed the night and left the next morning. Before she got in the car, she turned in the driveway and said, if he comes back, make sure he comes back right. Not just because the Venmo stopped. I nodded. The house felt quieter after she left, but not the difficult kind of quiet, more like the quiet of early morning before anything has started yet. The kind of quiet that belongs to you. I found the voicemail that evening. Evie had a small purple tablet I'd set up for her 2 Christmases ago, with a frog sticker on the back that she'd added herself. I'd shown her how to leave me voice messages through the app, the way we used to pass notes but with sound. She'd used it a dozen times over the past year. Songs she'd made up, jokes from school, a very thorough account of what her classroom hamster had done on Tuesday. I hadn't checked it in more than a week. There was one new message, recorded 3 days earlier. Grammy? It's me. A pause. The long, considered pause she always took before speaking. Even at 6, like she was choosing her words carefully. I wanted to ask you something, but I forgot what it was. Also, I miss you. Mommy says you're busy, but I don't think you're that busy. Can I come visit sometime? I made something for you. It has glitter on it. Okay. Bye. Love you. I played it twice. Then I took the yellow notepad from beside the phone and wrote her name on it. Just Evie. Not as a task, just to have her name somewhere in the room with me. The surgery was 3 weeks later. Estelle picked me up at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and a book in her bag, and she sat with me through the whole thing and drove me home after, staying until I'd had soup and was settled on the couch with the television on low. She didn't hover or make a project of it. She just stayed. There's a difference, and I knew it. Emmett didn't call that day, not to ask how it went, not to check if I was home safely, not even a brief text. Cordelia called at 6 from Richmond. "How do you feel?" "It's like someone shone a very bright light directly into my eye," I said. "But better." "Good, sleep. I'll call tomorrow." In the weeks that followed, I started going to the hospital on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The volunteer program was exactly what I'd hoped. They'd walk me to a patient room, give me a brief, and I'd sit with whoever was there. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes I read. Sometimes they slept, and I sat quietly in the chair by the window, which I understood better than most. There is a particular comfort in having someone simply present, not because they need anything from you, not because they're waiting for you to be useful, just there. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it until I walked back through those doors. I also started a new notebook, not a financial ledger. I wrote on the inside cover, things that are mine now. The first entries were small, a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. The morning I identified 3 different birds from the back porch without looking them up. A Friday evening when Estelle came for dinner and we opened a bottle of something decent and talked for 3 hours. And neither of us looked at our phones. The quiet pleasure of eating breakfast without rushing. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter than that, like realizing a room you'd stood in for years had a window, and you'd simply never turned to look at it. In early September, a text came from Emmett. "Evie keeps asking about you. I don't know what to tell her. Would you be willing to come by sometime?" I stood in the kitchen reading it. He hadn't said he was sorry. He hadn't said Christine was sorry. He hadn't acknowledged the door or the text or the 11 paragraphs, asking me to reconsider without taking a single thing back. I wrote back, "She's welcome here anytime. If she'd like to come visit, I'll be home." A week passed. Then on a Saturday morning, I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Emmett's SUV. He got out and opened the back door, and Evie jumped down, backpack on, something clutched in both hands. He said something to her. I couldn't hear from where I stood. She nodded, seriously, the way she did when she took something to heart, and turned toward the house. Emmett got back in the car. Evie came up the front path at a half run. I opened the door before she could knock. She stopped and looked up at me. She was taller than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was in 2 braids, a little uneven, one slightly higher than the other. She was holding a folded piece of construction paper, the edges soft from being carried around. "I made this for you," she said and held it out. I took it and unfolded it carefully. A crayon drawing, a house with a purple door, 2 figures standing in front of it with yellow scribbled hair, a garden that covered most of the lower half of the page in enthusiastic blooms, and in the corner, a sun with jagged rays shooting out in every direction. Underneath, in careful, slightly lopsided letters, "Mean Grammy." "Mommy said you might not want it," Evie added, watching my face with the particular seriousness of a child who has been told something and isn't sure whether to believe it. "Mommy was wrong," I said. "Come in." She kicked off her sneakers in the entryway, automatically, without being asked, the way she always had, and went straight to the kitchen and climbed up onto her usual chair at the table. I smoothed the drawing and put it on the refrigerator. I held it there with the same 2 magnets I'd always used. The avocado one she'd given me for my birthday, and the small round one that said home in curling blue script. "Juice?" I asked. "Yes, please, Grammy?" I poured apple juice into the small plastic cup I'd kept in the cabinet all these months. She swung her legs under the table and started telling me about kindergarten. Her teacher's name, the boy who kept borrowing her purple crayon without asking, the caterpillar they were watching in a jar on the science table, how long it was supposed to take before something happened. I sat across from her and listened. I didn't know what would come next with Emmett. I didn't know if Christine would ever say the things that needed saying. I didn't know if the door between us would open again the way it used to, easy and without thought, the way things are When no one has changed anything on purpose, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe some things, once changed, stay that way. I had made my peace with not knowing. What I did know was simpler. I had stopped shrinking to fit the shape of other people's needs. Not out of spite, not to teach anyone a lesson, just because I had finally understood that a life spent entirely in service of being needed is not the same as a life that is loved. Evie finished her juice and asked if we could look at the book again. The one about the caterpillar, the one with the tissue paper pages, and the hand-painted illustrations that we'd read together so many times she could finish most of the sentences before I got to them. I got it from the shelf. She climbed down from her chair, crossed the kitchen, and leaned against my side the way she always had. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like no time had passed at all. Like she had simply been waiting to come back to the place she already knew. I put my arm around her and opened to the first page. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone you loved, or finally said no when it cost you more than you expected, leave a comment below. Someone out there is sitting alone in a quiet house right now, wondering if they made the right call. They need to know they're not the only one. Follow along for more stories about the quiet, hard, necessary things we don't always say out loud.